Good afternoon. I really apologize for being late today. I want to start off with a statement on the killing of an ICRC aid worker in Nigeria. The Secretary General is appalled and strongly condemns the killing of an aid worker from the International Committee of the Red Cross in northeast Nigeria on Monday. The aid worker, Hawa Mohammed Liman, had been held hostage since March 2018 and was killed by her captors. The Secretary General expresses his deepest condolences to the family, friends, and colleagues of Ms. Liman and expresses his solidarity with the President and staff of the ICRC. Those responsible for the killing must be brought to justice. The Secretary General expresses his concern for the safety and well-being of the remaining hostages and calls for their immediate release. The Secretary General also emphasizes that all parties to the conflict must protect aid workers who provide life-saving humanitarian assistance to the millions of people in need in northeast Nigeria. And the Secretary General just got off the phone with the President of the ICRC, Peter Maurer, to express his personal condolences on this horrific case. Back here, the Secretary General today spoke at the Security Council meeting on natural resources and conflict, and he said that the exploitation of natural resources or competition over them can and does lead to violent conflict. Preventing, managing, and resolving such conflicts is one of the major and growing challenges of our time, he added. The Secretary General said UN studies show more than 40% of internal armed conflicts over the last 60 years have been linked to natural resources. He said that more needs to be done to regulate the provenance, sale, and trade of minerals through cooperative arrangements involving civil society, governments, and regional and international organizations. A positive example of this is the Kimberley process, he added, which succeeded in reducing the trade in conflict diamonds. His remarks are available to you. And I want to flag that at 3:30 p.m. this afternoon, the Secretary General will speak at the launch of the UN System Workplace Mental Health and Well-Being Strategy. He will be highlighting the importance of ensuring the well-being of staff, many of whom work in increasingly dangerous environments, and will also stress the need to combat the stigma of talking about mental health issues in the workplace so that staff feel comfortable disclosing what they're going through and can get the support they need. And our colleagues in the UN of the UN country team in Cameroon are expressing their concern about hate speech focused on ethnicity following the October 7th presidential polls. The UN received reports of individuals from opposing communities threatening to attack members of other communities, their properties in Yaoundé, businesses in Douala and other parts of the country, while others have been inciting hatred and violence along ethnic lines using derogatory language. The United Nations reiterates that all stakeholders must exercise restraint and ensure a peaceful process as Cameroonians await the final elections on October 22nd. The UN condemns all threats of violence and acts of intimidation and urges all actors to prevent risks and electoral processes. The United Nations continues to follow the situation in Cameroon and expresses concern about increasing violence in the northwest and southwest regions. And our colleagues at UNHCR have expressed concern over the fast-developing humanitarian situation in the Kasai region of the DRC, sparked by mass returns from Angola over the last 2 weeks. Congolese government officials estimate that some 200,000 nationals have arrived in the Kasai province alone, with more arrivals reported in neighboring Kasai Central province. Their arrival follows an expulsion order by authorities in Angola targeting migrants. UNHCR is appealing to the governments of Angola and the DRC to work together to ensure the safe and orderly population movement. And our humanitarian colleagues in Syria say the ongoing violence in Hajin and the eastern governorate of Deir ez-Zor is having a devastating impact on civilians. Armed conflicts both by air and ground have reportedly resulted in the deaths and injuries of civilians. UN estimates that at least 10,000 civilians are exposed to hostilities in the area, while 7,000 have been displaced to Syrian Democratic Forces-controlled areas in the past month, the majority of whom are women, children, and elderly. Many of the displaced are sheltering in the Garanji town, while others are in makeshift settlements where the humanitarian situation is reportedly dire. While UN partners were able to provide a one-time delivery of food, nutrition, and water and hygiene, sanitation assistance to some 5,000 displaced people. More assistance is needed to respond to the needs of displaced people and host communities. And Mr. Dimastor will be here tomorrow to brief the Council. He'll be here in person, and we have asked that he stop and speak to you at the stakeout right afterwards. And turning to Afghanistan, the UN Afghanistan Humanitarian Fund and the Central Emergency Response Fund have allocated nearly $35 million to support 2.2 million people impacted by severe drought in the country. Toby Lanza, the humanitarian coordinator, said the impact of the ongoing drought spans the north and west of the country, leaving communities in deep distress. He said that village elders in rural areas have told him that this is the worst drought in their lifetime and that food, fodder, and seeds are needed urgently. And a new report from the UN Migration Agency, the IOM, says that young girls sold in forced labor, the largest group of trafficked victims in Bangladesh Rohingya refugee camps who have been identified. IOM experts warn that more than a year into the crisis, that has seen the number of Rohingya refugees in Cox's Bazar soar to nearly 1 million people. More desperate families are sending their young daughters off into dangerous work situations because most households have no other way to earn money in the camps. And just want to flag the Director General of UNESCO, Drea Zule, is in South Korea, where she met with President Moon Jae-in of the Republic of Korea. She said that UNESCO is committed to supporting the inter-Korean reconciliation through concrete and symbolic projects. And today is World Food Day, and this year's theme is Our Actions, Our Future. Zero Hunger World by 2030 is possible. In his message, the Secretary General said that in a world of plenty, it is intolerable that 1 in 9 people does not have enough to eat. He called on governments, businesses, institutions, and individuals to join forces and achieve zero hunger and commit to a world in which every person has access to a healthy, nutritious diet. And a new research released today by the World Food Program shows that food is becoming less affordable in countries in conflict or subject to political instability. In dozens or more countries, persistently high food costs are putting the hopes of a nutritious meal beyond the reach of millions. And tomorrow at 11 o'clock, there'll be a briefing here by Felipe Gonzalez Morales, the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights of Migrants, and Amadou Tal, the Chair of the Committee on Migrant Workers. And at 1:15, there'll be a briefing by Idriss Jazeri, the Special Rapporteur on the negative impact of unilateral coercive measures. And today, we want to say that Yemen has paid its budget dues in full, bringing the honor roll up to. That is a perfect guess. You should have played the lottery today because you only get lucky once. Mr. Klein, you have the floor.
Thank you. Okay. It's been reported that UNRWA has posted a job opening for Director of External Relations, which is going to be compensated approximately $108,000 a year, tax-free, 6 weeks of vacation, a lot of benefits. And it's calculated that that's about, I believe, 14 times the average annual salary of a Palestinian. So I'd like to know, given the financial pressures on UNRWA, why it is opening up a job for Director of External Relations at that level of salary and benefits.
Well, I don't know about the particular job opening, but job openings in the UN are all on a certain level, a certain scale. The scale of salary of the UN is public for all to see. Staff pay there is a staff assessment which is akin to a tax, which is about 30% that is taken out of our paychecks. I think it is clear that UNRWA is in deep crisis, financial crisis, if we've reminded people, and it is very important, I think, for UNRWA to be represented as best as it can in terms of relations, donor relations, and external relations, to try to get its operations fully funded.
But given the fact that schools may be closed, according to the UNRWA director, and people laid off as a result, I presume, why this opening now? And will it be offered to or preference given to people on the ground there, local folks.
Listen, I don't have the details of the job opening. What I can tell you is that the job openings are pretty clear. They're either a local hire or international hire, and the full, transparent, and open process will be followed. Masood, and then we'll go to our guest.
Thank you, Stéphane. So I want to ask you about the Mr. Khashoggi's investigation, which Michelle.
Can you put your microphone in front of your mouth so I can hear you properly?
Sorry. Michelle Bachelet has called for independent and transparent investigation of Mr. Khashoggi's murder, apparently, because that is what is being suspected. Does the Secretary General also echo the feelings of his Human Rights Council chief?
I think what Ms. Bachelet said is the need for a prompt, thorough, effective, and impartial and transparent investigation. The Secretary General has absolutely nothing to object to into what the High Commissioner says. Not that he would object to what she says, but he fully backs her comments today. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Dujarric. I wanted to ask you about the Palestinian woman, a mother of 8, that was killed by an apparent terrorist attack of a settler. I know that Mr. Mladenov issued a statement, but he refrained from calling that a terrorist attack. I think if the other way around occurred, that there would have been no hesitation to call it as such. Would you call it as a terrorist attack?
I would refer you back to Mr. Mladenov's statement.
No, I understand.
No, I understand, but
let me rephrase it. Given the circumstances, and given that we have seen this kind of incident many times before, and it was immediately labeled as a terrorist attack, why in this case are you so reluctant to call it as such?
It's not that I'm reluctant. I said Mr. Mladenov issued a statement on behalf of the United Nations, and I have nothing to add.
Would we expect the Secretary General to call it as such?
Mr. Mladenov represents the Secretary General, and his statement is a reflection of the Secretary General. We'll go to Linda.
Thank you, Steph. I have a question regarding Yemen. We know about the dire humanitarian situation there, and there's been information about the, air attacks. I was just wondering what the status of the conflict is there in terms of the Houthi rebels, in terms of, what activities they're up to.
Well, the conflict is continuing. I can't speak for them. What I can tell you is that Mr. Griffiths has been very focused on trying to get the parties back to the table. We had a meeting in Geneva which did not pan out as we had hoped. There were a number of hiccups. He's trying to fix that situation to get the parties back to the table. The only solution is a political one. The fighting is continuing, and obviously the tremendous suffering of the Yemeni people is also continuing. Nabil, and then we'll...
Two crossings were opened recently between Syria and Jordan, and also in the Golan area in Konaitara. So on Golan, how do you describe now the operational situation for UNDOF? Is it now easier for UNDOF to monitor the area and for convoys?
The opening of the Quneitra crossing is very much welcomed by UNDOF, as they had not been able to use it. And it's important for them to be able to get to both from the Alpha and the Bravo side. So for them, it's a very positive development. We would want every peacekeeping mission or observer mission to be able to operate freely in the area in which they're mandated to operate.
So does this mean that UNDOF now is back to all the previous positions?
As far as no, they are not back to fully exactly to where they were before the conflict started, but this is obviously a move in the right direction.
And with Jordan, is the flow of humanitarian aid and goods between Jordan and Syria
I'd have to check on that part. We'll go all the way to the back.
Thank you. the United States, that have been criticized on human rights issues, is having today an event in the ECOSOC chamber about human rights in Cuba. The Cuban mission sent a letter to the Secretary General asking for the cancellation of this event and rejecting this action against the island. Does the Secretary General have any comment on this issue in particular?
Sure. As I said yesterday, the parameters for holding UN events at UN headquarters is regulated by an administrative circular, which is public, which I think you all have access to. The rules require that a proposed event must be consistent with the purposes and principles of the UN, and that it has to be non-commercial in nature. As a result of this requirement, the sponsoring permanent mission must certify that this is the case upon requesting the use of a UN conference room. In the implementation of the in-house regulations since their adoption in 1996, the Secretariat has relied on the responsibility of member states to proceed in accordance with the relevant regulations and the purposes and principles of the Charter. The sponsoring mission is fully responsible for the content of the meeting. Abdelhamid, you've been very patient. Others have been very patient as well. But
I want to follow up with the Mladinov issue. Remember, we raised the issue that the PLO has now a stand, and they're supposed to communicate to the Secretary General of their displeasure of his activities regarding the mediation between Hamas and Israel. According to the PLO office, I contacted them and said a letter should be going from the PLO to the Secretary General. Can you confirm that?
No, I checked with my colleagues upstairs. We have not received any official letter at this point.
And there is no development on this issue?
No, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Steph. I have a question on Guatemala. Over the past couple of hours, the government of Jimmy Morales has blocked and denied the visas to 11 officers of the Commission Against Impunity there, making it clear that it's taking further steps to block the work of the Commission there, and also making it clear that it's going against repeated calls by the UN to allow the work of the Commission. So I wonder what's the reaction on this new attack by the government of Guatemala against the Commission.
Listen, I did not see that story this morning. What is clear is that the Secretary General continues to stand in support of the work of the Commission and its staff. Evelyn.
Just clarification, was it one aid worker or two aid workers in Nigeria?
One was murdered by her captors yesterday.
Because I thought they said it was the second.
One was murdered, and others are being held, and they need to be released.
And is there anything new on Cameroon in the disputed presidential election?
Not anything more than I said earlier in the briefing. Mr. Roth.
I don't know if you discussed the Khashoggi matter before I came down here. I guess not. All right.
I did, but you're welcome to add to you.
Okay.
Anyway, go ahead, Richard.
Was there any contact between the Secretary General now that he's back plus 1 or 2 days with the Saudis in person? And I don't think he talked to the press as I asked for it today, though everyone else seems to be talking about this story. Does he have confidence in some type of actual investigation to find out what happened to him?
Well, I think we're following this situation very closely. I mean, we're hearing the same reports that you are. I think once something official comes out from one party or another, we'll be able to comment further. At this point, what is important is for the truth to be established, for us to understand what has happened to Mr. Khashoggi. And obviously, the more facts we're able to get, the more we'd be able to comment. But at this point, I would refer you to what the High Commissioner for Human Rights has already said this morning on the issue. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to find out about the Rohingya refugees. Has there been any updates between the conversations with the Myanmar government on the repatriation and the plight of the Rohingya refugees?
As you may recall, there have been site visits by UN officials in Rakhine State, and the last we reported, the conditions are not yet conducive for return. A lot of work still remains to be done. So go ahead.
who will determine that these conditions
Sorry?
are now good enough to repatriate them?
Well, there are issues, obviously, of human rights, of access to humanitarian services back in Rakhine State. But at the end of the day, it also bears reminding that it is up to the refugees themselves to decide when to go home. No one should be forced to return. And I did want to say, yesterday I was asked about Western Sahara, and I wanted to confirm that the Polisario, the Moroccan side, as well as Algeria and Mauritania, have confirmed that they will be attending the talks that will be convened by Mr. Kohler in Geneva in December.